One thing I wanted to, do we want to get into comparisons between 1 and 2 yet, or do you want to wait on that?
Well, I mean, we could certainly go into. I love talking about Phantasm too.
So just my 2 cents on it. Like, they had to, substitute for some reason. They had Michael. They, instead of using Michael Baldwin, they had
James Lee Gross.
James Lee Gross play him instead. Mm-hmm. What was the reasoning behind that?
So basically, when Universal picked up the film for distribution, they actually wanted to get more established actors to play Reg and to play Mike. Jody wasn't in the script at all, although Jody does come back for 3, 4, and 5. And Don Coscarelli, really, he had to fight to get the studio, to convince the studio to at least allow one of the actors from the original Phantasm.
But it was the main character, and that's what's the funny, or at least one of them very main characters.
Well,
in my opinion, the protagonist from the first one. They changed that.
Yeah, he is the protagonist. They decided that basically the Universal kind of yielded, and they went, okay, well, we'll keep one, but you have to decide which one we're replacing.
Right. So yeah.
And they actually made Reggie Bannister and A. Michael Baldwin both audition for the parts they had already played in the original film. However, it's really stupid, but they did it, the film probably would have had the same attendance, the same turnout it did if they had a Michael Baldwin, but Don Coscarelli ultimately decided to keep the Reg Man, which is great because it really did expand his role a lot. And they got James Lee Gross, who I know A. Michael Baldwin refers to Phantasm as the film that shall not be named because it's the only one he's not in. I actually think it's my personal favorite out of the entire series. It is to Phantasm what Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn is to The Evil Dead and what Aliens is to Alien. It's just amps up the playing field. I mean, it got a bigger budget. Don Coscarelli was able to really get creative visually, and there's a lot of Sam Raimi style in there. Just in the POV shots from the Sphere and things like that.
Did they hang out? Did he hang out with Sam Raimi? I'm curious about that.
I'm pretty sure eventually I think a lot of filmmakers that are considered genre filmmakers, even though Sam Raimi's became a big commercial filmmaker. I mean, outside of that genre, I mean, he's really only made 4 horror films, but
Coscarelli is from, where is he from? Because
he's from California.
Okay. So Sam Raimi's from Michigan, right?
Michigan, yeah.
Okay, that's why.
And I'd love to know if he ever hung out with John Carpenter and kind of how that might have been. Man, I wish that these great filmmakers would in the horror genre would make like an anthology film. I mean, granted, a lot of them did direct episodes of Masters of Horror, but just to have like an anthology film would be super. But the problem is we've lost George A. Romero, we've lost Tobe Hooper, and we've lost Wes Craven. And it kind of thins out that herd because it is kind of a niche genre. There aren't a lot of predominant filmmakers who manage to make films that get into the pop culture as well as horror films. So they cast James Lee Gross, and you might recognize him from films like Singles, where he plays Sensitive Ponytail Boy. I believe he's been on Justified. I know that he was a regular for Gus Van Sant for a while. He's in Drugstore Cowboy and even Cowgirls Get the Blues and My Own Private Idaho and To Die For and the remake of Psycho. And of course, he was also in Point Break. So I like James Lee Gross, and to be honest with you, I like his Mike.
Who did he play? Yeah, I mean, I did too. Don't get me wrong at all. It just threw me for a loop. I had to think. I was like, is this the same guy? Oh my gosh. Anyway, it did throw me off.
Right.
For whatever that's worth. And I mean, I get it. He wanted to have someone more seasoned. And I get that. I get the whole purpose for it. But it just, for me, it kind of, anyway, it was fine. It worked.
Yeah.
So and like you said, it's interesting because I need to see Phantasm 2 again because I am a little. I actually, there's part of me that prefers the first one.
Yeah, for me, Phantasm 2 just really amped it up visually and story-wise. It's a little less hallucinatory than the original, and Don Coscarelli explains the studio, they did test screenings of what the work print of Phantasm 2. And, excuse me, the studios, because they are money-making machines, and that's the nature of the business, they have to make money in order to keep making films. So they can be as artistic as they want, but if they're not making money, it doesn't really serve a purpose. They can't promote it, can't get out there. So I understand that. But studios have a tendency to think that their audiences are dumb and need their hands held, which is why there's a lot of stories that just tell you everything instead of letting you figure it out on your own. And Phantasm, you have to stay with it. You have to try and figure out. Without any of the sequels, it's completely open up to your own interpretation. The ending is very strange and very awesome. Did the events happen? Did they not happen? Is it just starting and it was all a vision that Mike was getting? I mean, who knows? But of course, then there's a sequel that makes it a definite. Yeah, that did happen.
Well, and funny, ironically, they both end the same way, getting pulled through some glass, right?
Well, the first three have the same quick ending, but the thing is, or shock twist ending, setting up the next film. But the thing is, with the second one, is the studio wanted them to tone down the hallucinatory aspect, and they wanted the story to be a little bit easier to follow, hence the narration, because the first film doesn't have any narration, but Phantasms 2, 3, 4, and 5 do. However, I still think it's a fairly hallucinatory film. There's still a lot of bizarre, random things that happen that are like, did that really happen? Or did Mike just imagine that happening? When he saw Alchemy's body laying in the abandoned morgue, was that a premonition, or was she really there and the woman that they pick up?
Yeah.
But then again, later on in the film, she's walking around and trying to find a ride, and it seems like she's very much a human being. It's getting into that hearse may have been where the tall man, because the tall man can shapeshift and he can change genders and things like that, and it's just such a fascinating story that the second one also, just like Halloween 2 and Evil Dead 2 and Aliens, it amped up the gore factor too, because the first one has some decent gore and some really interesting scenes, but the second one just, tall man melting and eyeballs popping out. And
you never forget everybody's insides being replaced with yellow number 5 or whatever,
Yeah, because I guess that's what embalming fluid does to you. I don't know. But I'll tell you, from that point on, I've been afraid of mausoleums, and I do not like to go into mausoleums because of this movie. Yeah, so a week ago, Don Coscarelli was here, Phantasm Live with Don Coscarelli, where he did a Q&A beforehand, followed by a screening of the remastered film. And then, if you had purchased his new book, you got to stick around for a meet and greet where he would sign the book and indeed anything else you brought. He'd sit down with you for a good 5-10 minutes, and just however long your conversation would go.
It's not messing around.
And then he would allow you to take pictures with him.
That's just not normal for someone of his caliber and of his. I didn't realize you had sat down with him for 5 or 10 minutes. That's unbelievable.
He has worked in the studios, and he has worked outside of the studios. I mean, studio films he's done like Jimmy the World's Greatest, Kenny and Company, Phantasm 2, Beastmaster, Survival Quest. Those were all in studio films, where the rest of his work, Bubba Hotep, John Dies at the End, Phantasm 3 and 4. Although Phantasm 3 did get a Universal release, and Universal is the studio that released Phantasm 2. So this man has worked with some big names, people like Paul Giamatti, Lance Henriksen, Dermot Mulroney, Bruce Campbell, Mark Singer, the Beastmaster, John Amos. I love this man. And he is so polite and so humble and so approachable. No ego there. But I got a chance to get some photos with him. It's one of my heroes. I love this guy as a filmmaker. And I was really impressed at how nice he was. He shook my hand and introduced himself to me. And I introduced myself to him. I asked him a few questions, one of which is, will there be a sequel to John Dies at the End, since there are other books in the series? And he said,
He probably answered with, only a prequel.
No. He actually said to me, he's actually been meeting and talking with some people to That's try cool. And raise interest to do an adaptation of the second book. This book is filled with spiders. Seriously, dude, don't touch it. That's the title. So the movie would probably be called This Movie is Filled with Spiders. Seriously, dude, don't watch it. which would be amazing.
And that'll be the sequel to John Dies at the End. Okay.
Well, if it gets made, here's what he said: he said, okay, so I've been
just really quick. Anybody, if you've not seen John Dies at the End, it's fucking awesome.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I got to see it during the Sundance Film Festival. It was on the last night. It played 3 nights. He basically said, "Yeah, I'm talking to some people. And he said, because there's 2 sequels to the book, and David Wong is actually writing 2 more books. So there'll be 6 books in all." And he's like, "That's a lot of material to work with, and I'd like to get back into that." I asked him too. Well, first of all, I was wearing my Phantasm shirt, and first thing he said to me after he introduced himself was, "I see you've got your Phantasm colors flying." And I was like, "You know it." And I proceeded to tell him how when I was 12. This got me into like modern horror, and he's like, "I've heard that a lot from guys your age. It seems 12 and 13 seems to be the right age."
Well, especially since Mike's character was out, and that's a lot of that time period in that early '80s thing, and that was happening. There was so much of these great stories were born. So many franchises that lived for a long time. That's when those stories were born.
Yeah, man, I came straight from work as I did, and I said, if I had known you would be willing to sign other material, I would have stopped at my storage unit and picked up my 1-sheet Phantasm 2 original poster. And he went, "Thank you for bringing that up. I am so proud of Phantasm 2. We worked so hard on that." And I said, "It shows. That is my absolute favorite. Phantasm's the classic. It's the tentpole. It's the original. But Phantasm 2 has a huge place in my heart." And he was very happy to hear that. Then I managed to get him to sign a copy of this book, True Indie, Life and Death in Filmmaking, which is a good read. I'm about halfway through it. But really nice guy. So I had him. I'm currently reading the book. I'm only halfway through. It talks about his whole, basically his 4 decades in the industry, and he spends a lot of time specifically on the Phantasm films, Bubba Hotep, John Dies at the End, Beastmaster, and Survival Quest. I mean, those are his most iconic. And Beastmaster, I love that movie. I haven't seen it in a while, but I love that movie. And then he ended up signing it for me, and I love that. I mean, honestly, that's so cool. He was kind of signing, I think that was his sort of staple signature quote, "Keep your balls in the air."
And it's a special yoga move. Actually, that's what it is. It's a special, kind of like the breath of fire, the tweak of joy, the keep your balls in the air. And
yeah,
that's what it is.
Exactly.